systems go. Clear for liftoff. What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka ToeTagginTambo, back for another edition of Leverage Lane. We've got week 8 ahead. Going to be talking all things ownership across the DFS industry, focusing on DraftKings, single entry, GPP Focus. Had a huge week last week. We'll recap here in a bit, but we're going to break that down for you. Then we'll get to how to leverage the common build once we go down, as we go down Leverage Lane, and then the light at the end of the lane. Once we put it all together, myself, my partner in crime, Alex Blickle, will break it down for you at the end with our takes and our Leverage Lane picks at the end. Alex, huge week last week. Mr. Marvin Mims over there. And if you put it all together with both sides, we had the Herbert setup on the other side with Jonathan Taylor with Mims. And I was very close to 100K with just that combination. I know some SHIPIT Nation members found the top with that, and many people were tagging us with the Mims stuff and the Herbert side. What was your thoughts? And still, the last one, I promise. Hashtag never Mahomes, not needed. Oh, but he only played 3 quarters. I honestly think Herbert played 2. Knicks played 1. And they both still beat him, but I get it, all the technicalities. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Yeah, last week was a lot of fun. It was definitely my best week of the season since week 1. Also a great week on the pick'em and prop side. Had Marvin Mims ladders. I know a lot of SHIPIT people, a lot of Leverage Lane watchers, a lot of FTN subscribers, and people in my Discord all said the same thing. It's like, even if they weren't directly following the ladder bets that I put in my Discord, just the analysis that we talked about here about Marvin Mims made people run to go ladder Marvin Mims. So that was a really fun fourth quarter. You mentioned the fact that Bo Nix only played 1 quarter. Marvin Mims got like 60 of his yards in the last 5 minutes and 23 seconds of the game. So that was a lot of fun the way that game ended. Great week all around. The Chargers stuff really came through. I didn't have it with Gadsden. I had Keenan, but I didn't have Gadsden. So that plus playing Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt really cost me, a chance at a takedown, but really, really good week. Certainly my best week since week 1. Hopefully we can duplicate that success this week.
It's funny. It was a Lad and JCM that cost me the 100K on FanDuel. I had a really good week on Sunday, ended up following it up with a win on Monday in Showdown. But I think the biggest thing was JCM had like 3.7 on FanDuel. That hurt me. And Lad had that one fall through his arms. On DraftKings, the Mims could have had a touchdown too, by the way, there at the end, the other one that sort of fell through his arms. So either way, really good week. Excited to recap that, but we get right back to it. Week 8 is a brand new week. We got to do it all again. We're going to break it down as we usually do. If you like this show and you appreciate it, I see a lot of support in the chat. We thank everybody for watching. Make sure to smash that thumbs up. It's the like button. Hit that. Subscribe to the channel so you can keep getting these free shows. Let's start as we always do. And I know you have some different than industry projections, which we love. You've got some very accurate ownership when it comes to NFL, and just do a bit of a grand scheme overview, if you will, of the ownership and what you're seeing for higher dollar, smaller field, or just single entry in general kind of thoughts where it does go up for some of these players. Derrick Henry is one that comes to mind this week at just 6K, but what do you got over there for some of these positions? And I'll recap anything we don't cover.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll say is, more than most weeks, this is a week where I think ownership around the industry is wrong. And it's hard then because it also means that ownership this week is probably tougher to predict. Ownership doesn't become wrong just out of the blue. Like, people around the industry aren't just making mistakes. This happens when the range of outcomes for a lot of different players is wider than usual. And so I do think it's a week where we have to kind of really look at this and pay attention all the way up to lock to do our absolute best to figure out where people are going. But we also need to build lineups with the information in mind that, hey, ownership can end up very different than what I'm looking at right now. So, you want to have things built in, like, if you're wrong about this, are you still protected on that steam with this player, something like that. So understanding where things are connected, like what happens if Derrick Henry ends up 50%. As of last night, I was by far the highest in the industry on Derrick Henry at 37.5%. It looks like he might even go up higher than that now. I might have to get him over 40% in single entries. So if he does that, how does that affect Lamar Jackson? How does that affect Zay Flowers? as Lamar's ownership changes, what does that do to Jalen Hurts' ownership, who now has a really straightforward two-man stack? Remember a couple weeks ago when Herbert steamed because Quentin Johnston was out. And so all of a sudden Quentin Johnston out meant Herbert stacks had a very clear and obvious double stack. It was Ladd and Keenan Allen. This was before Gadsden kind of erupted. So the fact that it was easy to stack him, it was straightforward how to stack him, made Herbert go through the roof. Well, now we have that exact same thing going on with Jalen Hurts, who kind of exploded last week to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Now he has a really clear double stack with A.J. Brown out of Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. So Hurts with his rushing upside and with his push touchdown upside, he's going to be popular. How does that affect Lamar? If people now choose Hurts instead of Lamar, does that in and of itself boost Derrick Henry because people view the Henry play as leverage off the Lamar stack? So there's a lot going on. There are a lot of moving parts on this slate, but I think the general overview is we do have some big-time ownership this week. Jamar Chase, Derrick Henry, Devontae Smith, all are over 30% for me. Jamar Chase is going to push 40% for us. And then we have a bunch of guys around 25, including all three of the really expensive running backs, Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey. I think that to me is the biggest question. How many people jam these top running backs? And the more they jam these top running backs, who are the cheapies who get steamed because of it?
Yeah, I love a few things that you brought up there. And this, if anybody who hasn't watched this before, this is the focus of the show as we go down leverage lane. The first part is figuring out the ownership, but not just who is high owned. How is the ownership connected? Who is connected? And then in the second segment, when we get to, okay, now that we know that stuff, what does the common build look like? And you said a couple things there, like one that's most interesting. I think of those big three that you just mentioned, I think McCaffrey definitely gets pushed down some. And I think the interesting part, and why is that? Not just because the other two seemingly look better on paper. I hear people talking about them, but I also hear people talking about the lowest price ever on George Kittle since 2018 at 4,500. It's National Tight End Week. You hear all these narratives and thing. And again, we're focused on leverage, not just narratives. So the point would be, if you see something like that, I think a lot of people could say, oh, well, at least if I don't get to McCaffrey, maybe I can get there with George Kittle. And that's at least protecting themselves, but that's a way to think about it differently. The other thing you said, I think you nailed it, is the spot on with the Hurts stuff. Hurts, Devontae, pick up the steam of Lamar and Zay. It's not quite a complete, I don't think it's an exact 2v2, but it's got to be pretty close, right? I think it's 68 and 5,400 for 66 and 59. So it's very close. It's a couple $100 off, a few $100 off. That's a point of when that happens. Again, you just know this stuff with it. It's a little bit of art versus the science, but when people are moving to that, they're saying, since I'm doing that, I guess I better get Derrick Henry in there because I don't have Lamar. I don't have Zay. So again, it's all interconnected. That's the important piece. And this reminded me of a quote on our launch version of this show. I think it was week 3. We brought this out, Alex, and we talked about it. And I love this quote, and it's good. It was just your personal thing, but you said, the goal isn't to build a good single entry lineup. We can build lots of those with sound process. We can make something look good. You said the goal is to build the winning single entry lineup. And of course, the critics out there were like, well, no shit, pal. Like, I get, yes, but it's not about the statement as much as the how do you get there. And that's the whole point of knowing what is going on and then what really can crush that and beat that or make things work. Go ahead.
I think what I said, and maybe I said this incorrectly the first time, I think what I said is the goal isn't to build good lineups, it's to build the best possible lineup.
Right.
And the best possible lineup means that we're not doing things that are okay. It's not, we're not doing things that are fine from a correlation standpoint, but they don't make a ton of sense. It's to build the best possible lineup. And so like one immediate takeaway for me when looking at this ownership is I don't want to play Devontae Smith or Dallas Goedert as a one-off. It's too likely that if either of them goes off, that they're bringing Jalen Hurts with them. So for me, it's either double stack with both of them and Jalen Hurts, or stay away from that passing game, whether that means I'm playing it through Barkley, playing the Giants defense, or just hoping the game underwhelms overall.
Great point. And that's something, again, people are focused on cash games or something like that, or treating their single entry like a cash game. I think they feel very safe and strong with like, I'll just plug in Goddard here, because if I'm not on Smith, if I'm not on Barkley, I'm not on Hurts, I better at least get a piece of it. Can it work? Yes, but you nailed it, is if Goddard actually breaks the position and has a day for the slate at that price and at that position, it's very likely there's going to be a Hurts version of it that has you covered. So you could almost be backing yourself into a corner before things even start. Again, we don't have the answer sheet. until it ends. People will come back with a winning lineup with Goddard and be like, I told you I could do it. Like, good for you. We're explaining theory and concepts, and that's the thought process that's so important to think about when you're building out your lineups. And we'll get to some of that later when we get to the finish line. What with leverage lane, just going back to, I wanted to see one more thing. So Lamar Hurts, I've heard a lot of talk about Bo Nix, but it's mostly for cash games, like 6K. We saw what he can do in one quarter. Let's just plug him in. It's the Dallas defense. Do you think Bo Nix comes in just after those guys, or where do you have him on the chart?
Yeah, I've got him at 10%. I've got Flacco at 8.5%, Rattler at 6%, Tyrod at 4.5%. I think the biggest question mark is this morning we got news that Kirk Cousins is likely to be the starter this week for Atlanta. $4,400. That's a $500 discount from Michael Penix. I think the overall sentiment there is going to be that Cousins might raise the pass volume in the offense, where maybe it's not so much that like he's better than Penix, but it just means they call 5 fewer runs and 5 more passes. And so I'm not exactly sure how people are going to view that. You made the great point before we went live that, okay, but Vegas actually lowered the total with this news. So maybe people follow that, but it wouldn't surprise me if we see Pitt and London gain a little bit because of this news. And that $500 difference, it's small, but it can be really impactful, especially if that means that all of a sudden, a lineup that couldn't fit Jamar Chase now is able to fit Jamar Chase. So a lot of the time, like a $500 difference can matter a lot more in some lineups than it does in others. And I think the Falcon stack stuff, because there's already a lot of interest on those players, on Bijan, on London, even a little bit on Mooney, a decent amount on Pitts, less so now that we have the Goddard play. But, there's also some on the Miami side. There's interest in Jalen Waddle. There's interest in Devon Achane. So maybe we see this become a thing. That's not something I've been able to really work on this morning yet. So I don't know, but there could be ownership there. And then the other guy who I think is going to get actually 2 others, Baker and Daniel Jones, both around 7%.
One thing I'll add there that, again, like I said, I know you're going to go back and work the numbers and spreadsheets, the algorithms, and have them all plugged together, because you mentioned one interesting point. It's not just the $500 savings. That's just a note. I think it's going to be sharper. It's not my leverage lane or anything, but I think it's going to be sharper in tournaments to leverage Bijan and stack with Cousins. You mentioned what if it is, and I know this is such a small number, but what if it is 5 to 10 more passes? Again, they can go to Bijan. He can do lots of good things with the ball in his hands. But the point is more of, I do feel like less people will go that route. And I also will say the reason I see that is because, again, the total didn't, it dropped a little bit with the news and all that. But also, I still see like Egbuka, Shaheed Olave, Devontae Smith, Zay Flowers, obviously Jamar Chase, people that want to pivot to T. Higgins. Like, I see a lot of opportunity where I think Drake London could still just stay in check. And I think you've made the Mooney call a couple of times on this show and in general, and it could even become like a meme spot. Not saying it will exactly, but just noting it is like we've definitely seen opportunity. If they're passing it a bit more, he just has this way of getting open. And obviously when teams have to cover Drake London and other guys like that and watch out for Bijan, he's a pretty good spot to find that. So I think it could end up being lesser owned, even at the 4,400. I also think we haven't got there fully. And it's not one thing we don't do always is cover all the values. I think you covered wide receiver quite a bit. You covered, you covered running back quite a bit. We covered wide receiver pretty good. Tight end, like we have Schultz, we have Goddard, we have Cade Otton, we have Tyler Warren, who's only 55, George Kittle, 45. We have tons of options there. And I know people are willing to go double tight end. And then you think about like the Houston guys that are out with Nico Collins and Kirk. There's cheap guys just on that team alone at the wide receiver position. So you're going to think about, and Garrett Wilson's out for the Jets. And I'm not saying people want to go to all these spots, but it's more interesting to me of would they end up on Kirk Cousins more often for the savings when they've got savings everywhere else. And then they need to jam in the Chases and the Jamar Chase and the couple of good running backs at least. So I don't know how many people end up there, but I think it could be a pretty good tournament stack. Do you have any extra follow-up thoughts or any other wide receiver values before we go to the common build?
You talked a little bit there about like how many tight ends we have available. And this week I'm projecting the most double tight end that we've seen so far this year. I've got it at about 20%. So 1 in 5 lineups expecting to be double tight end. And it's because of what you said. Yeah, we have Tyler Warren, we have George Kittle up at $4,500. So it's not like everyone's paying down at the position, but then Goddard, I've got it 25%. He's $4,200. And then there's kind of a string of guys under 4,000. Pitts, Mark Andrews, Mason Taylor, K-Dot, and Dalton Schultz, all getting some. And then there's also one down at $2,600, Isaiah Likely with Lamar back. I was expecting a lot more interest on a $2,600 Likely. He was second only to Zay Flowers last week in routes run for the Ravens. So I'm interested down there if he's really going to be 5% or less. Early in the week, I thought he was going to be 15 to 25%. So I don't know why he's being glossed over so much. People really seem to just prefer Mark Andrews at $1,000 more. That seems like a mistake to me. I honestly wish that Mark Andrews was 30% owned and I could leverage him with Likely. But it also looks like, you know what? What's one of the ways that Henry doesn't get there in massive ownership is if he doesn't score touchdowns. What if Likely catches 2 touchdowns and that's all he does on the day? He smashes and leverages Henry. So I'm definitely interested in Likely. And I think you can also play him as like a contrarian way to play Lamar Jackson. So we've got that around the corner as well.
Interesting news just came up, excuse me, while we're here live. John Harbaugh said full practice, non-committal about Lamar Jackson starting, and Lamar Jackson ran scout team at practice Friday as an indication he may not return in week 8. And then we already had Snoop. We had Huntley get called up and set up to go. So interesting that could change a lot as well. Let's do it because we're on the show live. What do you think happens if we find out Lamar is not playing? What changes, or how do you see this go?
It changes everything. Zay gets no ownership. Well, he might still get some just because the price is really low, but Henry would go way down. Like Henry at $6,000 would still be a fine play against Chicago. It's not like their defense has been good, but without the threat, the offense, and without the threat of Lamar keeping the ball and without Lamar being on the field to move the offense and to get them scoring opportunities, like Henry ran for 122 yards last week and wasn't even close to being a useful play. Only had 9.3 the week prior, 7.8 the week prior. So like he hasn't been doing anywhere near enough. His only good week this year was week 1. I think he would go way down, and this entire slate would change. I mean, if you're taking away that much ownership from the running back position in the mid tier, and you're taking away that much ownership from the wide receiver position in the mid tier, there are so many places that ownership can go. So yeah, that'd be really, really interesting. I don't know what to make of that. Like I can't really put like a probability yet on how likely I think Lamar is to still play. It's far from a definitive report what we've gotten, but it would change just about everything.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%, but I will say this. One of the most interesting things of concepts and talking through stuff like this is if it sounds like we're not actually getting the news until inactives, which means that there are so many people, man, that just build their lineups and don't. And I'll also say this. One of the most interesting things of all to me is I'm not hearing anybody say the reason Derrick Henry is a good play this week is because of the matchup and because of Lamar Jackson being back, who actually helps him. Everyone is just saying it's the price. It's $6,000 for Derrick Henry, and they're disregarding that there's about 9 other running backs on this slate I could make a case for, a lot of them in really good matchups at fair prices. The only thing people are saying is they finally priced Jonathan Taylor and Bijan up and made the pricing tighter, but my guy Hoop yesterday made a pretty good point on the Cash Show it's not really – it technically is tighter, but it's not really. It's like the right price. They finally priced them correctly, but then they also didn't price a lot of other things correctly, if that's considered correctly. So it's not really the way I would look at it. So it's going to be really interesting to see if people say, you know what, even if Lamar was out, I'll still keep my Derrick Henry because he's only $6K, good matchup. Let's run it and see what happens, because that would be potential for huge leverage by going underweight or fading altogether. Yeah,
one thing I'm very confident in is if Lamar doesn't play, Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert will be extremely popular. We could see a 30% Hurts just like Fields a few weeks ago. We could see a 40% Devontae and a 30+% Goddard. Reason being, it's not just that those are priced very similarly, but it shows like the kind of preferences that DFS players have, right? If someone is playing Lamar Jackson as their stack, they are saying, hey, you know what's one thing I really love for my quarterbacks? Rushing upside. I want that extra ceiling. Jalen Hurts gives you that. So it's an extremely similar stack in terms of the archetype of the quarterback, the price of the main wide receiver, the price of the main tight end, the predictability of who's going to produce if this quarterback does throw a lot. So much of that Lamar ownership, that stack ownership, would just be a perfect flip-flop over to Jalen Hurts. So he would steam in a kind of a massive way, to the point where there's not a chance in the world that I would play the Eagles stack if there's no Lamar.
Yeah, it would be way worse than I know you were hard on yourself about this one, and I don't think you should have been, but obviously we do review our stuff and come back on it. But when you talked about that Allen thing a couple of weeks ago with Keenan Allen, where it was like once QJ's out, you went to that. I've made this mistake huge in the past. That was last season when Pickens was on the Steelers and he was ruled out late. Calvin Austin III came in. We all wanted to get to Barkley on that slate, and right as soon as the slate locked, it was not results. It was what had I just done was, oh man, I literally did what everybody just did. And now Barkley got super steamed to the moon when no one could play him before, because everyone was so excited they had a way to get him. And then you had him with like the worst chalk wide receiver value on the slate. So it's not always. And the answer was Freiermuth in the same game at a onesie position in a pretty good matchup, had almost 20 points. And that wouldn't have put you necessarily on Barkley or needed to go there. So anyway, the point being, you do got to think these things through. And that's why the if this, then that scenarios are so important when putting these things together. And like we talked about in this segment one, is how is ownership connected? That's how it's going to connect. I don't think anyone's going to be running to play Snoop Huntley. I really don't think people are currently playing Kirk Cousins as it is. They'll be playing him in tournaments. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking about in single entry, higher dollar, smaller field, and all that stuff. There's enough options at affordable prices, and there's enough values that are true values to the slate that I believe people will be able to get there. So anything else for segment one that you want to talk about, or do you want to go on to segment two and try and start putting this together with some combinations, with some game stacks? Anything else we missed?
Well, this is kind of going into segment two here, but since the start of 2022 when the Eagles got A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts is averaging 23.5 fantasy points per game with A.J. In 5 games without him, what do you think that average falls to?
I would have I'm the worst at these guessing games, and I've also been put on the spot on the ranking game and not done too well either. So maybe you should just tell us what I know you got the best stats. What is it?
It's 14.0. So 23.5 down to 14.0. It's exactly the point that you just were kind of alluding to. It's like this idea that when a quarterback loses their main option, we shouldn't flock to him just because it's easier to stack him. We should remember, hey, wait a minute, that makes him less likely to succeed. And I'm not sure there's a quarterback wide receiver duo where that's more true than Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. Like all this, trade discussion of potentially trading A.J. Brown is insane to me, because anyone in the building kind of knows this. A.J. Brown was a game changer for Jalen Hurts' career. He unlocked so much. It's not just how good he is. It's not the emphasis that he forces the opponent to put on the deep passing game. It's A.J. Brown's strengths align perfectly with Jalen Hurts' strengths. I think we really, really this. To me, is an edge this week. Understanding that no A.J. Brown is bad for the offense in general, for Jalen Hurts specifically, especially against a defense that just performed pretty well against this offense. This to me is like fading this spot is as good a leverage spot as any we've had this year, just because it makes so much sense from a football perspective, not just the DFS game theory perspective.
Well, then I got to ask one more, and then we'll get to the common build finally, actually. But what about Barkley? Like, nobody's on Barkley now. Nobody's going to be on Barkley. If that happens, it just picks up even more. And this is actually one of the better matchups we've seen this season is against the Giants on the ground. But that's, again, we're week 8, et cetera, all those things you just listed. And then we are changing the offense altogether. But you usually are pretty good about picking your team off. But the key to me is more from a DFS perspective is the ownership, the potential for the steam on the pass game, and then on top of it, the fact they still have like a 26-point team total at home, and he's squeezed in between the price ranges of like currently the Derrick Henry or going up to the Bijans and Taylors. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm going to do some pretty good work here on dismantling the idea that I'm a Philly homer. When I don't think my team is set up for success, I'm going to tell you guys that. And this is a week where I think I'm much more likely to play the Giants defense than I am Saquon, because exactly what I just said, right? Like one of the reasons why AJ has been so impactful for the Eagles is because he forces that second safety back for opposing defenses. He makes it so much harder to stack the box against Philly. If you stack the box against Philly, you get beat down the sideline by AJ Brown. It's that simple. We saw it with Minnesota last week a number of times, whether it was Devontae or AJ. he is so incredibly impactful to everything. The main adjustment that teams made to this Philly offense at the end of 2023, when they started to really struggle and just collapse down the stretch of the season, was they said, you know what? We're not giving any more, deep single high looks to AJ Brown. We're just going to get rid of that. We're going to make Philly run the ball against us to beat us. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge game changer, right? Everyone talks about how Howie Roseman paying for a running back was kind of anti-analytics. It really wasn't. It was pro-analytics in the sense that, okay, teams have made this major adjustment against us. Analytically, what can we do to get those single high looks back for our offense? Well, we have to actually really, really punish people for putting that second safety back there, which means we have to run the ball extremely well. Let's go get a Saquon Barkley kind of game changer. So yeah, I think this is not a spot where we say, okay, if they can't throw the ball, they're just going to run the ball. Because I think they've already had these major efficiency issues on the ground. Main one being they just can't break the long run, right? Saquon's longest rush this season is 18 yards. It happened on the very first play from scrimmage against the Giants, but it's still a long run on the entire season of 18 yards. So I won't be going to Saquon. I think I might be backing this Giants pass rush at what, $2,100, especially if that's leveraging the Eagles. So that's probably going to be how I'm doing it this week.
Talk about leverage lane, baby. That's going to be huge leverage, especially like you said, that Hurt stuff is already steaming up with the setup there of the Goddard, Devontae Smith stuff. I also think when Alex talks, I listen, and not doing a ton of bets myself personally, but when I am, it's under on the Eagles total, because otherwise, where do these points come from? It's 25.5, 25 points, depending on your book. Where are those coming from if they're not coming from any of that? And I think, like you said, there is going to be an opportunity here where it just ends up being a bit of an under spot or underwhelming. And look, the Eagles could win 20-17. Could be a grinder type game, but that's not the team total that's required. And that's what you could end up see happening. So I like that call. Let's go on. Let's move to some of the combinations that you see happening out there. I think we know of a couple of them. Let's talk about what the common build kind of looks like. And I think the biggest thing is, and some of the stuff we didn't mention yet, is like the Rachaad White mixed with the current Derrick Henry. But even if we want to leave, again, I'm not going to fully leave him out. I think it's still going to be possible. But let's just say Rachaad White, Jamar Chase, some of these tight end spots like Schultz or Goddard. Like, what are you sort of seeing if we're discussing the common build?
This is a weird one because most of the time, like the main stacks, people are targeting a game. But because it's Lamar and Jalen Hurts, like nobody from Chicago, nobody from Philly or from New York is going to be very popular, right? Like I think a lot of these stacks aren't even going to use a bring back. So the first thing I'd say is if you do really like either of these stacks, the number one thing I think you have to do is find a bring back you like. Scatterboo, Wan'Dale Robinson for Philly stuff. DeAndre Swift for Chicago, I think is a solid play this week. So I think like that's one way that you can just get an advantage within those stacks. But it also means that the mini stacks that we have to avoid each week, there are probably fewer of them this week. I think the mini stacks that might be the most popular are actually the ones that make the most sense this week, which would be something from Atlanta, Miami. Because like if you're using Bijan Robinson, what's the biggest concern you have here in this unbelievable matchup with Miami's defense that might as well like not even be on the field at times? It looks like they're playing 11 on 10 every snap. Well, it's Atlanta gets up so big that they just say, all right, we don't need to give Bijan 80% of the touches this week. Let's get Tyler Algier really involved. Mm-hmm. So if you want Bijan to have access to that true ceiling, you need Miami to actually score points and to push them. So Bijan and Achane, Bijan and Waddle, like that makes a lot of sense this week. So even if that's more popular, I think the correlation actually makes it doable. So I don't think I have mini stacks that we have to avoid this week. It's almost like I've got one-offs that we have to avoid this week. I don't want to play Zay Flowers as a one-off. I don't want to play Goddard or Devontae Smith as a one-off, because if those guys have success, they're bringing their quarterback with them so often that you don't want to play into something that makes it harder for your fade of the highest upside, rushing upside quarterbacks on the slate to hurt you. So that's I think my kind of like larger scale ownership analysis for this week.
Which I think is still important. And that's, obviously people want the biggest combination. Like some of the stuff you can put together, like you said, like from building out a cash game type common build where you're going to have Chase, Rachaad White, one of Schultz or Goddard. You're definitely going to have one of, if not both, Devontae Smith and who do we talk about earlier? Zay Flowers. Like that's the type of stuff. But I like what you said there because, for me, let me put it this way. What do you see Waddle's single entry ownership at right now? What do you think Waddle comes in at?
So I have it as less than the industry. I think I have him at like 9%. I think a lot of the industry has him around 15%. But important. Oh no, I have him at 11. But importantly, like in Bijan lineups, Waddle might be 25%. So when you're using him, if you're using him well, it's not like he's one of those contrarian separators. He's just helping you be right about Bijan instead of Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, or Jamar Chase, things like that.
I don't, because we're on the fly and it's going to be so tough to look it up. But man, I know I can look it up because there's like stack seeker and combos and things that you can check out. You usually check all this stuff after the fact as well. I just don't have a good example from last week. But I just don't see a world where Waddle gets owned. And well, yes, he would be more owned in those Bijan lineups. I was going to say, I think if you see Bijan getting up over, 30 to 40, if he's in that 30 to 40% range, like we suspect in single entry, I think a way to slice into him is with Waddle. And it's a secondary stack that actually makes a lot more sense than some of the other things we're talking about, where it's not baked in, et cetera, et cetera. But the point being, he needs to get pushed. And at 5,700, even if Lamar was out, I don't see Zay Flowers coming down enough. But even if you do, I still see Jamar Chase. I still see Devontae Smith. And then because Devontae Smith's only $200 more than Waddle, I'd see a lot. I think I'll see more Robinson, Devontae Smith, or Robinson, Zay Flowers than I'll see Robinson, Waddle. But because of Waddle's percent, like for Waddle lineups, yes, more Waddle lineups will have Bijan in it because that's how they'll be making it work. So I get where you're coming from on that, but I do think that's the types of things that I look for, where it's not only is it a secondary stack, but it's one that would make sense because what keeps him out there. And you did a good job of this the week that James Cook crushed. It was like, if James Cook is going to do this, it's going to require this. And if you remember, it was actually the Saints they were playing that week, and Rattler and those guys put up like 19 points and made it a game for 3 quarters. So I think that's kind of things where a lot of people will just overlook some of that stuff. I feel like we almost reverse engineered the popular combos to find like a different one that you actually could play with good reasoning. To your point of some of the other stuff, people often forget you need some stuff to speed up a game. And the example is going to be in the Ravens spot too. Like a lot of the reason that stuff was even in consideration, and I wasn't going to go here for my leverage lane, but I think I was going to mention in that game was I actually thought the Bears side of that stack could be interesting with like Rome, or if you want to use Swift with somebody in like a secondary stack. My point was I thought that maybe that would make it, because Lamar and that offense actually humming for once now that he would be back, if he was back, would maybe make it so the other side could push it further. Now, I don't know if that'll be the case as much. And that's kind of the interesting thing about when you're looking at it, and you nailed it with like the Giants and the going against the Eagles. That's actually a spot where maybe the Giants defense could become the leverage piece on this slate. And they also make a hell of a lot of things work at just $2,100. So you don't always need the big score. Sometimes you do, but that could be a spot that happens. What else are you seeing if we turn to like game stacks and things like that? Even if it's places that you don't see the combinations as popular, it's almost flipping it on this slate to working it in the other favor of what are some ways we can go. Because like you said, I love your call. I don't think people are running back a lot of these stacks this week. They're treating it more like some of the pricing got tighter, so I'm going to go, even though it really just became correct, other stuff isn't correct, so I'm just going to go make lineups that make sense and work.
Yeah, I'll give you one. There are 3 really high upside rushing quarterbacks on this slate, and one of them is not going to be owned, Josh Allen. I really like Dalton Kincaid this week, $3,300. The thing about Carolina, they're not just a really good matchup in general for tight ends, but they're a really good matchup for tight ends for at least one specific reason, probably multiple actually. But one of the main ones is they're getting killed by play action. And only one guy on this Buffalo team excels in play action, and that's Dalton Kincaid. So I think Allen and Kincaid stuff makes a lot of sense. I would have liked Josh Palmer here, but he's likely out, or he might already be rolled out. But on the Carolina side, because we have Andy Dalton this week, I think this game as a whole could really speed up more so than most weeks that we have seen from Carolina. I still think they're going to try to run the ball a lot against Rico Dowdle, or through Rico Dowdle, but Buffalo knows, hey, you know what we've been weakest against? The run. What does Carolina want to do? Run the ball. So we could see them really try to stop the run, and Carolina say, okay, we've got Andy Dalton this week. We can actually kind of throw the ball. So Ted McMillan, $5,700. I think he's got a lot of upside in this matchup. So Josh Allen, Dalton Kincaid, Ted McMillan. Maybe you find a fourth somewhere. It might even be Dowdle. Maybe you go more on the Carolina side and hope that Josh Allen does a lot on the ground. But I think that's a potential like great way, not just to approach the slate, but you're kind of directly leveraging the Lamar and Jalen Hurts stacks because you're using the same style of quarterback and you're just hoping that your guy outscores him. And that actually is, almost the exact same structure too, right? If we're talking about a mid-tier wide receiver and a cheapish tight end on both of those other teams, we're doing the exact same thing with McMillan and Kincaid, even though it's one guy now on the opposing team instead of both with Josh Allen.
Yeah, this might be like $300-400 off. Again, there's a ton of ways to find it on this slate, but I honestly think Hurts, Devontae Smith, Goddard, and the Bengals D, which will be very popular on this slate. We don't always talk about that, but just noting it, it's almost the same price to play Allen with Kincaid, Tet on the run back, and then throw in your Giants D since you're not on. You're double leveraging it, but in a way that makes perfect sense. And it's a 4v4 that someone could do the math on. It's not that far off, though. I can tell you that because Tet is $200 cheaper than Devontae Smith. Kincaid is only $100 more than Goddard. Yes, Allen is more. I think he's $900 more, but it's like 600 or 700. I think it's $600 less from Bengals down to Giants. So you might need to find $300-400, but it's just proving a point of like how could that could definitely still get there. Let me ask you this then too, because I think people would appreciate your explanation on this. It's you made it really clear and an excellent explanation earlier on why Goddard may not be a good one-off this week, right? Because you know that not as many people are playing Allen, like there's not a high likelihood that he's going to get steamed. Do you think for $100 more, a pivot to Kincaid would be okay as a one-off based on the quarterback and the stacking not being there to support something that would come up over the top and crush Kincaid? What do you think about on something like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I would also say not just like Kincaid as a one-off, but if you're using what you said, which I think was a phenomenal connection there, to say, okay, if you're going to the Buffalo stack instead, throw in the Giants defense. Yes, that is also like the perfect lineup that Derrick Henry actually makes sense in. Because even if you think Derrick Henry is way overowned and doesn't deserve to be 40+%, well, the time to use him is when you're saying, okay, I'm killing the Philly stack with the Giants defense. I'm leveraging the Philly and Baltimore stack with the Buffalo stack. Let me also kill the Lamar stack by saying all of the touchdowns go to Derrick Henry instead. So I think that's like another way to do it. So if like you're building out a shell, I think a really good start is Allen, Kincaid, McMillan, the Giants, and then Derrick Henry as one of your running backs.
And it's such a different way to play Derrick Henry. So assume Lamar plays in this example, just to give the example, and we so people are still on him. Even if Lamar's out, I still think he's gonna have enough ownership to matter. But my point being, so many people think of it like, and I watch this every week. I do the review show over at Mastermind, at SHIPIT Nation Discord, people posting stuff. It's like, man, I tried to do what they said on the show. I went with Allen, I went with Shakir, I went with Kincaid, I got Ted in there. And then since I wasn't on Hurts and Lamar, I played Henry, I played Barkley, and then I punted 3 spots. And it's like, geez, like it's the 3 punts that got you. Yeah. We just told you how you can still do the exact same thing. Will the Giants D work out? Maybe not. Maybe they suck. And you're like, that's a horrible play. That's fine. But they make perfect sense for that build. And they're only 20. You spent $8,100 leveraging those 2 other quarterbacks because you still went with the popular 6K running back and the $2,100. But instead of putting in like $14,000 or $15,000 towards leveraging the other side, you still made it so you could have a better overall lineup. And that goes back to your original quote, which I'm not going to butcher the second time, but you got it right the first time. It's your own quote. But the main point of playing like the lineup to get to the top and win, that's why you get there. And then other people are like, well, if I only got these 3 punts to come through. Yeah, that's a lot of things to ask for. That's like 3 underdogs on a betting slip. If only they come, that's why you see so many parlays die on the last leg. Same thing in this example. You may be able to get a much better overall lineup that gives you equal or more chance to actually take down a single entry tournament, and you're still leveraging it in the same way. That's the stuff when we say we're talking about things differently than others. Maybe some do, but for the most part, you don't see a lot of people just put those pieces together. Hopefully that helps you guys put those pieces together out there as well. Just going through it, I'm going to save one because I certainly have a spot for leverage lane and that I'm going to get to. Maybe some can already predict it. I typically will play this way and maybe some can guess it in the Discord. One thing we didn't spend enough time on probably that I want to spend right now on just to make sure we hit it is the Buccaneers situation. Obviously unfortunate for Mike Evans. I mean, obviously always a big opportunity for him each season. He goes out and crushes it, but with the clavicle, the concussion, all that stuff, it looks like, he could return this season, they said, but it'd be later in the season. But where are you landing at with like Egbuka, Tez Johnson, Rashad White? And then I know you mentioned earlier, like Baker sort of falls into that just outside the top 2 spots right now, but he could also pop up if we get news of Lamar not playing in the end now that we got that update. So what are you doing with this? What are you thinking about this Tampa Bay side of things when we land there?
I think one of the ways I like to kind of think through these plays is, what did the field think about them before? The last time we had kind of this situation on a main slate for Egbuka, he was 1% owned, and then he crushed against Seattle. Like, he was literally 1% in the $200 single entry that week. So the fact that he's now 15% because he smashed against Seattle makes me think, okay, we are now overreacting to what happened previously. I think we were right the first time when we said he's not at the level yet where he should be a $7,000 player on a main slate. And I think that Tez Johnson is someone who, like, I would have been much more interested in him if he were contrarian, but it looks like he might be around 10%. So I'm kind of just not on it, and I'm going to hope that the offense struggles a little bit, which is a lot harder to do when you're playing the New Orleans Saints. But to me, there's just a little bit too much ownership on all of these pieces for me to be excited about them. I'd probably be happy to play any of them as a one-off, probably Egbuka excluded. If the last spot of my lineup just landed on them and they made sense, then okay, sure. But other than that, like, I'm certainly not going to prioritize anyone from this game.
So I think this game, again, it's not my leverage lane, but this could be a sneakier spot only because we've seen Radler's ability to push the game at least somewhat. We talked about early, even up against a team like Josh Allen and the Bills, which is questionable now with some of the games they've had and losing to Atlanta and things that maybe Atlanta's just good. We figured out. So, or Buffalo's just bad. We don't know. And they got away with some stuff, but either way, this game does have some. So when you talk about pieces being interconnected, yet where does the full classification come from? It's like, okay, Olave, popular each week, and he's had some pretty I'd say some higher variance when it comes to the bonuses and things like that. So there's a possibility. Shaheed, we know, can set a game off. Radler at 4,700 sort of fits that mix. On the other side, we know the only play that's really getting pumped hard is White and then Egbuka, and for values, Tez is up there. But how many are playing Baker with that stack? Do you think if you had to stack this one, you would go the savings side with like the Radler, Olave, Shaheed, or, well, it's not quite savings at the quarterback, would you consider something like Baker, Tez, and Cade Otton, who's $100 less than popular Dalton Schultz, and then use a piece like Shaheed on the other side to try and speed that pace up, or Olave? What do you think you would do if you were going that route in this game?
First thing I'll say is I think this is a game where we probably do want to avoid some of these mini stacks just because it's just the conditional ownership thing. Like Egbuka, Olave, Shaheed, Tez Johnson, all these, Rashad White, like, they're all getting enough ownership that I think a lot of people clicking them are going to use them as part of a mini stack. So just for the sake of unique combinations, I would go elsewhere if you like any of these guys, if you're prioritizing any of these guys. But that's a great question. I think the guy that I know I'd be using in some way is Tez Johnson, because when he hits, he's going to speed up the game so much. I think I'd go to the Rattler side. I think I'd go Rattler, Olave, Shaheed, and Tez Johnson. And now you have 2 guys speeding up the game in Shaheed and Tez, where you're still hoping like, hey, I want this game to be close. If this game is close, I should just go with the cheaper side and the side that doesn't need Egbuka to hit, save a lot of money that way. And you're still getting as much, if not even more, upside because you have these explosive play guys.
I also think that's the other thing is that's it's the easier way too, but it doesn't mean everyone's going that way, but it's the easier way to get Rashad White in there if you wanted to. Like when you talk about being able to go a full game stack, if you truly feel this is going to get some back and forth and these prices are going to pay off. The one thing that is a little bit comical, and we make fun of it all the time, is like Olave to be in the safe play and all these things. But people have said that about Drake London and then watched him explode for 30. People have said that last year a bunch about Terry McLaurin in games, then he'd explode and, oh, he's just a cash game play, cheap option. Like they won't boost it up. At the end of the day, Olave is a wide receiver 1 and he's under 6K. Right now this week, people will say, well, yeah, but so is Devontae Smith. But Devontae Smith, we've already had that conversation, is filling the gap of 1. And yes, he's had his games. We just saw, but that was the game AJ Brown was in. We've already had these conversations. So the point being, Olave will be owned anyway, but that's the ways, like you said, why it's probably better to think about an actual game stack than it is to think about a secondary or a one-off when you get to a place like this, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's a really kind of important point here on Olave, which is when is he most likely to access his ceiling? Yes, he had 2 touchdowns last week, nearly had a 100-yard bonus, but they only scored 14 points. So if you look at his game logs, 12.4, 11.4, 15.7, 10, 12.9, 15.8, he's doing this with a team scored 26 once, and every other game they were 19 or fewer. So they had one game of 21. Okay. But you see the point, right? It's like, when is Olave most likely to have the game where he goes for 25 or goes for 30? It's what happens if New Orleans actually scores 27 or more points in this game. And so if you're betting on Olave, you might as well bet on the game getting there. And if the game gets there, you don't just want Olave. You want the really cheap quarterback who's now producing 27 plus points. So that's why, to me, like, this is, I'm in agreement with you. I think this is a good underrated game stack, but I don't really want to attack it. If I think this is going to be 27-17 Tampa and neither team outproduces their expectations, then I don't need to go to them for a one-off. I either want to bet on this game as a whole or not go to it.
And I will say this, I agree with all of that. I feel like one of the things, it was always, a thing that we talked about, but I think like this is a setup of, we're talking single entry, right? For the most part. And it's like, well, yes, you whatever you're comfortable with, and so you should do it. That's the whole point of leverage lane. Stay in your lane and run with it. If you feel like this is the spot, get there. I'm more likely to get to this spot, and we do put it on the thumbnail, like single entry, 3 max, 20 max. I'm more likely to get to this spot personally as I open things up, as opposed to where I begin things. That's just my lanes that I'm looking at. So, but from a single entry perspective, I think if you're going here, I will say, going back and rounding out this segment a little bit before we'll hit on some more. If you guys have more things, throw them in the chat. Also, I want to say for this week, make sure you put in the comments, let us know what your lane is. I don't know why we haven't been doing this all along. It's a lot more fun when there's the engagement and people putting it in there. And we're going to look at circling back and have some prizes and stuff. So let's hear on what is your leverage lane. Not in the chat right now. You can. I know some people throw it in because they don't listen. But after the show, the live show ends is when comments open up. And a lot of people watch this on replay. They can't be here first thing in the morning on a Saturday. So you're watching this on replay, go right now and put it in the comments. You're currently watching live as you are. You'll have to wait till the end. But quickly, Alex, this is probably one of those combination spots that we see that becomes popular because of the Rachaad White stuff. Like we said earlier with Bijan and with some of these other guys, even the Ravens side, it's not really true that everyone's just picking someone automatically from the other side. There's ways to leverage those one-offs with, like someone asked about Swift. I think Swift is a great leverage option this week on the opposite side. The Ravens get run all over. It's definitely a possibility. But in this game, White with Olave or White with Shaheed, that'll definitely be a pretty popular combo. I don't know if it'll lead the way, but it'll definitely be a popular combo. And like you said, if it actually goes that way, it could be something where they're coming up over the top with Olave actually hitting a ceiling day at the same price almost as all those other receivers we've already talked about. If he's the one that pulls away with the 25 to 30, that's definitely going to help a $4,700 quarterback. And we know it's not because he's throwing touchdowns, because the only time he's tried was an interception. So if he's getting that many points, it's likely going to be coming through Rattler. But anything else to add on that? Anything else you want to cover here before we get to the end of it all? We got tons of time, so I just want to make sure.
No, I think you nailed it.
All right, let's go. Let's see what else is in the chat here. Some people talk about it. Did you want to talk about this one for 2 seconds? I know that we mentioned this spot earlier, and now you can do it from an if-then perspective, because we know we got the news Underdog and Rappaport really put it out. They reposted his stuff, but just noting it, and they credit him, of course, but just noting it. Any thoughts on Swift as leverage off of Henry?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ben Johnson deserves like a massive amount of credit for what he's done to the Chicago run game. He's found what works for Swift. Swift in his entire career, like even when he was productive on the ground in Philly, his like rushing yards over expected was terrible. He's just not that good of a runner. He doesn't have that good of vision. He's not great at making guys miss in a meaningful way. But Ben Johnson has found what works for him. That's hitting the hole like as fast as you possibly can, a lot more outside zone than inside zone, more man duo than inside zone, and things of that nature. So I think Baltimore all season kind of has been a team that their they're almost like okay with being run on, and they just say, yeah, but eventually you're going to have to pass against us, and you're not going to be able to do that when you need to. And so I think this is this is a spot where like I could very easily see Swift getting that 100-yard bonus again. You're going to need him to score to be really impactful, especially given like just how good these expensive running backs have been. But he makes a lot of sense as leverage off of Henry. The only problem with it there is, like, do we really want to be betting on the Baltimore offense if Lamar plays failing as a whole against a weak Chicago defense? So I don't necessarily know that. I kind of feel like Swift would just be a better play if Lamar isn't playing, and now it's more likely that Chicago is going to control the game, that their defense is going to be successful, and they are going to give their offense the ball in some good spots, and their play volume is going to be better as a whole. And so Swift is going to have an easier time getting to 20 carries, things of that nature. So I actually wrote about Swift in one of my articles for FTN as a potential leverage play off Henry. But the more I think about it, the more I think, man, that's kind of a weak probability bet that the Chicago defense is going to just totally shut down this Lamar-led Ravens offense. So I think the Swift play becomes a lot better if we have no Lamar.
So you nailed that. And I will say that's incredible, because that was going to be my thought right there, because knowing the Ravens, like I said, it's interesting. It's a lot of the Derrick Henry stuff this week is price-based. I know people it's like, oh, he's never been at this price. You get the big dog at this price, et cetera, all these different factors. But I think he's way better with Lamar in. I think that was the more exciting reason why he at least made some sense at 6,000 with Lamar being there. Like Lamar and Derrick Henry together is shaking the cameraman more often than anything else. Like the cameraman doesn't even know who has the ball, let alone the team on the field, when it's different. And people say, oh, Snoop at least plays more like him than who was just in as the quarterback they just had? What's his name? Cooper Rush. Sorry. Yeah. Cooper doesn't really rush. That's the thing about him. And so that's kind of the point there, where this at least could be a little bit different, but I don't think anybody's mindset, if we get the news after inactives on Sunday that Lamar is not playing, I don't think anybody is pushing the button on swapping Derrick Henry to Swift. And that would be the case to me, where it would actually make even more sense. And that's where these game stacks could fall apart and all these different factors. So that's another thing to think about when you're building out. Yep. Jay asked, do we break down quarterbacks? We do. Last week, our leverage lane quarterback ended up winning me almost 45,000 or something. So yeah, just keep in mind, we're talking through the entire slate on this, but we do pick our spot at the end. It's not always with the quarterback, but hopefully we gave you a ton of quarterback thoughts throughout this show. And this, shout out to my guy, Sean, always here appreciate his support, but just noting, he's not the first to mention this. I think this is the last thing we at least need to touch on before we go to our lanes. And if it's your lane again, I'm sorry, but I don't think this is chasing the Mims stuff. I just think people like what they saw from Bo Nix last week, but he's most certainly up there. I think he's top 3 in quarterback ownership as it stands.
Yeah, I'm not going back to Marvin Mims this week. I made the case for Marvin Mims last week, and it was very dependent on the way the Giants play defense. A lot of single high, a lot of man, a lot of blitzing. We don't get that in this matchup from Dallas. Now, Dallas has been vulnerable deep. If you look at like their deep passing loud stats, they still look really, really bad. They still look really, really vulnerable in that way. But if you take out week 2 against Russell Wilson and Malik Neighbors, they actually look pretty good now. So they have addressed the issue, and they have at least fixed it to some degree, where it's no longer a great deep passing matchup against them. And the style of coverage they play just don't fit Marvin Mims as well as they fit Troy Franklin. Actually is actually like the Denver guy that I like the most this week, which is not great for Bo Nix, I think, because when Nix has those huge games, like Franklin is the kind of possession receiver. He's going to have 8 for 80 in his biggest game. I want Bo Nix when it's Marvin Mims and when it's Cortland Sutton that I expect to really produce, because that's when you get the 6 for 120 and a touchdown, the explosive play kind of dynamic that really takes Bo Nix where you need him to get. Now, the flip side of that is with Bo Nix, at least you always have the rushing upside. And one of the things I really liked, like I think a really encouraging sign for his fantasy success moving forward, is that game-winning touchdown, 21-yard run. That was a designed run. That wasn't a scramble. It was a designed run. I think in these like key leverage situations, they really know that they have that skill set in him, and they're going to lean into that. So he only has, rushes of 8, 8, 6, 5, 5 so far this year. So he's not ever going to give you the rushing attempts and the rushing volume that you get from Allen, Hurts, Lamar, so on and so forth. But you're going to see that at least in the shootout style games. And so that way, I think you could absolutely see a ceiling for Nix. My biggest issue with him is, even if you get the ceiling performance from Bo Nix, does he give you a ceiling performance from any of his wide receivers? And that, to me, is the biggest obstacle in the stack. I just don't see it. I also don't really want any of these Cowboys. Like, I know someone in my Discord made the point that, hey, this is one of the highest totals on the year, or one of the highest totals of the week. Sure. But even though Dallas has a high team total relative to the rest of the slate, they're implied for less than a touchdown, or more than a touchdown less than they have averaged this season. So even though it's a nice total, the implication is that their guys aren't going to match their season-long, standard production. So I'm not interested in Dallas guys. So I don't want to bring back. I don't really know who Bo Nix would bring with him. Does Troy Franklin have enough of a ceiling to play him with Nix? So I like Nix in a vacuum. I just don't like anyone else in the game. So I won't be stacking him.
Yeah, good breakdown. I think, there is some interest in the other side of it. Like, I get where people are going with this total, with this game, seeing what Knicks did last week, how bad the Cowboys have been. I know they got some pieces back, but then they lost Diggs again. And in that secondary, they got Bland back. He had his fifth or sixth pick six or something again. Like, a guy just keeps going off that way. But it's harder to get it right. There is more options. They're mixing other guys in too on the Denver side, but you can just play Knicks. He's 6K. And I think in cash games, people will likely now get to more of the Jalen Hurts stuff based on the information, only $600 more. So I think Knicks would become a tournament play. You could play Dobbins and the Broncos, do something like that if you wanted to get after it this way and say that's how they're going to get their points. I definitely think in tournaments, somewhat interesting that way. I will give Rance a little secret. Don't tell everybody, but every game has been a must win for the Ravens and they're not winning them. So so you know, I don't think that changes anything when it comes to this week. Jay Main said it here. I'm a huge Ravens fan, if anybody doesn't know. And it has not been good, and I don't know if it will be that much better this week. We'll see. If Lamar is back, I obviously think there's a chance. The one thing I was holding out for, Alex, I know we don't always do our homer takes on here, but I was hoping that Lamar would come back. The AFC North is still in shambles, and so it's always wide open. And like, the last thing you want to see is the Ravens start to win games for the AFC North. That is, I want to see it very badly. Get healthy, get better, and then start to heat up as the playoffs come around, because then it's one and done. And that's what makes the NFL so exciting when we get down the stretch. But I definitely think that's the thing. So what else do we got here? Anything else?
Yeah, I've got something else on Lamar.
This is a narrative, but just to note it, leverage-wise, that would be another way to play this game differently. He's not getting much ownership.
Yeah. I have no interest there. The Denver defense is too good. He's just priced too high at this point. He's one of those guys, like, I'd be interested if he was 5,900, and I still wouldn't be that interested just because he's not one of those guys that has a massive ceiling. You kind of need the 3 touchdown game. He had a 2 touchdown game, 130 yards against the Jets, but that's the Jets. So I think most of the time we're going to see a true ceiling for him is 24, 25, and at $6,800. Like, I want the guy who can get me 30. One last thing on Lamar. He practiced fully yesterday, so I'm not as concerned as Rappaport. It seems to be that he's running scout team. Like, they might say, okay, we saw enough from him yesterday. Let's just give him like an easy day, keep him a little bit active. But even if he plays, it's a hamstring injury. Do we know that he's 100%? Can we expect him to go out and run as freely and as often as he usually does? That gives him that kind of, insane ceiling, insane upside. I kind of think not. So I kind of am in the boat that I hope he plays, because I think it makes for a better slate. It gives us these like massive leverage spots that I feel pretty good about this week. Like a lot of, I think one of the themes of this year so far has been that the chalk, it's not that the chalk is hitting more often than usual. I think from my own numbers, it's hitting about as often as usual. The difference is when it's hit this year, it's hit in like a way where you kind of needed it. Whereas in past years, there's been a lot of, okay, well, the chalk didn't fail, but you were also totally fine if you didn't use it. You could have had any of these contrarian guys and outproduced it, where the chalk this year is kind of giving you the scores that you need more often than it has in the past, but it's just not hitting more often than it has in the past. This feels like a week to me where the chalk is more fragile than it's been. I think that we're going to see chalk fail more this week than we have so far this year, and we're going to be rewarded for these fades more this week than we have so far this season. That's my hope. Of course, I could be totally wrong, and all this chalk could hit in the way that you need it as well. But that's kind of my read on this slate if we get Lamar in. So I hope that he plays.
I think we're seeing it clearly. I feel really good about this, and that's a good spot to lead into our leverage lane. And I got to go first because I think there's a chance. You never know. You've used this one before, so I kind of got to go there first. And then you're good at adjusting on the fly. I'm not. I'm a very prepared, organized spot. So I think this is the way I want to do it. So one guy we left out, and I left him out on purpose because it was going to be for this. People know how I play. You gave some amazing stats with real sample size. It was either last week or the week before with these high-owned wide receivers. I think it was the week Puka was crushing and everyone was surprised he was crushing at his price tag. The week before the injury was the week you did this, actually. There is a receiver on this slate that is going to be very high-owned that is, as much as everyone says, oh, they made the pricing tighter, they made the pricing correct. I'm going to keep using this. My guy Hoop used it yesterday. I love it. On the running backs, they did not make the pricing correct on Jamar Chase this week, yet I don't see many people playing Joe Flacco. And Joe Flacco is a seasoned vet, going back to my Ravens stuff. Elite. I've backed him up for years. One thing, if you don't have to believe he's elite. He was at the time, by the way, in playoffs specifically. He had a crazy record going in, went on to win the Super Bowl, etc. But don't have to stick up for him anymore for that stuff. He has an elite mind. And the way his mind works is just throw it to the guy that's your best receiver, and you might have success. And when that happens and you get an actual slate-breaking ceiling slate like we got out of the original week when I had the Stafford, Puka, Adams week, that's what I'm seeing here again. And so putting Joe Flacco with Jamar Chase and even putting T. Higgins into the mix as well, I think he is going to stick to those guys. I think it's a game script independent, whether they're up or down. I see that as being the way. I think that's going to be how it goes this week. So my leverage lane is going to be Joe Flacco, Jamar Chase, and it's to be determined. So I'll leave him out of this. Like last week, I went Herbert and Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to use the two of them. I'm going to slice and dice Jamar Chase with Joe Flacco. I think a lot more people are finding the money to spend up to Knicks, Hurts, Lamar if he plays, et cetera, you name it, and moving it all around. I feel like this is the best spot. They have almost a 26-point team total at home, playing the lowly Jets, missing all their pieces. I think they're going to do it here. So I got Joe Flacco, Jamar Chase. What do you got? What do you think, and what do you got?
I really like that. I was worried when you first started saying it because I thought that our leverage lanes might be like directly contradicting, but now they actually work together pretty well. I'm going to give two because my first one is, I think, too close to yours. My first one is T. Higgins.
Let's do it.
And the reason I say T. Higgins is because you can play him in two ways. You can either do exactly what you said, use T. Higgins in the Flacco doubles. You can also use T. Higgins just to leverage the 40% on massive price tag Jamar Chase. Now, I think I agree with you that, like, even though it's a really big price tag on Chase, it's not necessarily high enough, $8,100 when we have $9,500, $9,000, $8,800 for Taylor, McCaffrey, and Bijan. Like, if you look at our projections over at FTN, Taylor, McCaffrey, Bijan all project better than Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase has the higher ceiling projection than all three of those guys. Kind of the nature of the position. It's also the nature of Jamar Chase. So I agree with you. He's underpriced, but it is still a really big price tag, $8,100 compared to $56 for T. Higgins. So Higgins works in both these ways, but like the key for me, the volume has been awesome for Jamar Chase. It's also been awesome for T. Higgins. 8 for 62 against Green Bay, followed by 10 targets for 96 and a touchdown against Pittsburgh. Higgins is being targeted a lot as well. And we're going to get a game, every single season we see with Chase, there are games where teams have a very effective game plan against him and they sell out to stop him. We're also seeing now like a very predictive route tree for Jamar Chase, where the vast majority of his stuff is less than 10 yards. He does have a couple downfield shots, especially on the sideline towards the end zone. And so like, I think maybe they're going to set up some double move stuff for him. But if you put someone underneath and inside of Chase, I think you can take away a lot of what he's doing. The only way you can do that, though, is if you let T. Higgins get some one-on-one opportunities. So I think when we see Chase finally have, I'm not even saying he fails, But when he finally has a game where it's 7 for 90 and no touchdowns, I think that comes when T. Higgins goes 7 for 110 and 2 touchdowns or something like that, right? So when Chase has an underwhelming game, I think Higgins is going to have that ceiling game. You can also, though, play it exactly the way you said. You hope Higgins does what he did last week and Chase does what he did last week, and the double stack is golden. You're better off with Higgins and the double than you would have been with just the single with Chase. So lots of ways to play that. And then the second one, just because I think that's a little bit too close to your leverage lane, is that Josh Allen stack that we talked about. Josh Allen, Ted McMillan, Dalton Kincaid, leveraging both Hurts and Lamar stacks. I will be more likely to play that if we don't have, or if we do have Lamar playing. But I also think it still works because even if you're only then leveraging the Philly stack, like you're still getting almost as much leverage, because I think the Philly stack is going to take on the ownership of itself and Lamar stacked if we don't have Lamar. So 2 leverage lanes for me: T. Higgins instead of Jamar Chase, and the Josh Allen game stack.
Yeah, I might bold it up a little bit and say I'm going to run all 3. That's what I'm committing to. You don't need a run back. If you do, I get it. Like some people mentioned National Tight End Day with Mason Taylor, assuming he plays. On the other side, he is the same price as Dalton Schultz, I believe, who's super popular there for good reason, or he's $200 more or something. So you could do that. But yeah, I'm going to bulk it up and say I'm going to just play all 3 of them and run it that way and hope it gets spread out enough. The one last thing I'll say on Jamar Chase is it's been like a constant over the last couple of weeks. Like people can do whatever they want to do and try to do a lot of things. We said it for Gadsden the other night. Oh, he doesn't have to do what he did the game before that as long as he does something, and he goes off again. We've said it about Rico Dowdle for multiple weeks. Oh, he doesn't need to get 200 again as long as he just does something. 200 again. Another good game. If they would have not ran Chuba Hubbard for 1.8 yards per carry, it could have been even more. So they had to find out, though, and they had to get that proof first. But either way, people just constantly want to say someone can't do it again. Go to the casino for me, stand by the roulette table, and tell me it can't be red again after you see 6 reds. It happens. So it definitely can happen again. And I think this is a spot we could see it. It's really hard to control Jamar Chase. Anything else you've got? Go ahead.
Yeah, there was something I had. On the way back from Cincinnati stacks, I think Breece Hall's the guy. And one of the main reasons I say it is because I think they're actually 2 cheap stacks. I'll just throw this in there that I have a little bit of interest in. Tyrod Taylor's one, Cam Ward is the other. I know Cam Ward is an absolutely disgusting idea. If you want to hear more about why I like Cam Ward, jump into my Discord. But the Tyrod stuff I think is especially interesting because you could play like Tyrod, Mason Taylor. I even saw a couple stacks were simming well for us. It was like you can use both Chase and Higgins, but the rushing for Tyrod the rushing and the savings of Tyrod makes it where like you could do some single stuff there. So if I were using the Flacco side, I'd want to have something on the way back that says Flacco crushes, but Tyrod does not. And the main way that happens is if Breece Hall has a couple rushing touchdowns and keeps Tyrod off the board that way. So I think Flacco, Chase, Higgins, Breece Hall is a really, really sharp way to go.
Yeah, I'll probably have some of that because obviously this is my single and mixing it in, but I'd argue both ways on it because one is like the Tyrod stuff. If you clearly believe it and others are saying it and people see it, that Tyrod can push this game enough, then yes, it could end up being like Tyrod, Jamar, and Higgins, like instead of Flacco. But no, like how many people are going to have that? That's like when people say double, to your point of a few weeks ago of like double tight end never hits. Well, if 1% play it, you're not going to see it very often either. How many people are going to play that? Nobody. And I probably still have like 8 points or 6 points less with Flacco in that range, but maybe it's more and he beats him. But as long as you think someone can push it, it still then matters of how you're building out the entire stack. The other thought would be Breece Hall is $100 more than Henry. So maybe there's something you could do there with a pivot spot. But I'll just say that as long as you think the other side can push it, and many don't, but then again, the numbers kind of bear out that they can. Their team total is almost 20 in this spot for the Jets. That's what excites me. I think what people misconstrue this, you do need someone to push the Flacco side to make this work. 100% agree. Do you need to force figuring it out in a single entry and trying to pick that spot? You do not. And that's the factor that I want to land with my point at the end. So I like your call. I think I'll get there in my MME sets because I'm obviously going more places than one with this, but I'm committed to it in the single entry stuff. And I think the end of the day, things can change this week because of the way the slate could change with that news with Lamar, but I'm assuming right now we still see him. Hopefully we do. And I still like a lot of this regardless. So I'm probably not moving off this anyway, but I'm definitely committed to bulking it up with the double. You don't need a jet, but if you want one, he mentioned it, Brees, Mason Taylor, however you want to go about it. Josh Reynolds, if he plays, who knows? Like it could be anybody, but that's what I'm saying. It's really hard to figure that out. And so that's definitely something there in tournaments. It's all related to tournaments. I should say in MME, or if you're playing like 150, if we're bulking out your portfolio, then yes, I think like obviously just that you will see sharper players that have Chase Brown. The matchup is good on the ground. If you don't think the Jets can push it, this could be the way the game just goes, that the Bengals do get this. And this would significantly leverage Jamar Chase because nobody's really using Chase Brown in a running back position that has so many good options this week. And a lot more of those lineups are using Jamar Chase. So it's kind of interesting. Our leverage lane at the end, we still get to talk about some more possible leverage for this slate. Any final thoughts from you, Alex? And if so, let the people know where they can find you either way.
At Alex Blickle 1 on Twitter. That's all I got. And you can find everything you need. FTN if you want the data that I use, like all this stats up stuff. And obviously my link to my Discord is there as well. A lot of leverage lane watchers have joined the Discord. They seem to really enjoy it. So if you've been kind of tossing around, remember promo code leverage gets you 10% off forever. So use that one as well.
Awesome. Good stuff again this week, man. Love breaking this show down with you. It's typically turned into like an hour and 15 minutes, which I don't mind because I think it's all good. The people seem to like it. There's a lot that comes out. We get to talk about a ton of different things, and it really sets myself up, and I'm sure the same for you and many listeners, where you can get yourself in a good headspace going into Sunday while you wait on that final news. Myself, Hoop, and Title will be back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, same time this show started, for all the final thoughts of the week with those updates leading up to the inactives. And then if you find me on Twitter or X at ToeTagginTambo, you can use the code SHIP19 at SHIPITNation.com to get in. It gets you 5 days for $19 on any core or starter monthly all access that includes SaberSim. So it's the best way to check it out. Thank you guys so much for watching. That's going to do it for the Week 8 edition of Leverage Lane. For Alex, for myself, ToeTagginTambo, let's ship it.